Sunday Gold's a Florida State baseball podcast back on the airwaves here on Monday, March 2nd. Aria Masudi, Brett Nevitt. Brett, we turned the page, man. The month of March, we've played baseball almost a month now, and the Noles are 8-2 after a sweep of the Citadel, the Bulldogs, out of the SoCon. And the themes of the weekend, the pitching, fantastic, especially the starting rotation. The first weekend, we got to see all three guys pitch in their normal spots. It wasn't a completely normal weekend. The Noles didn't play on Friday due to the Savannah Bananas being here, some weather on Friday as well. So they pushed to a doubleheader on Saturday, and then they get to play Sunday as well. But the top three guys in the rotation all through in the order that the pitching staff, I think, intended for them to throw in, right, when the season began a few weeks back. And good to see Trey Beard in there. Good to see our friends over at Alumni Hall doing great, right? Alumni Hall, your place to get all your favorite Florida State gear, 15% off of your entire order if you show the code SG15. You can say that to them in the store over there at Market Square off Timberlane Road, or if you go to alumnihall.com and type in the code SG15 online, you'll get 15% off. Saw fans all throughout the weekend at Hauser. The newest jerseys, they had hoodies, caps, shirts, you name it, they had it. And so Alumni Hall providing you with the best gear and friends of this program. And then Metro Deli, got to shout them out as well over there on South Monroe Street, not too far from the Capitol. And some of the best wraps, sandwiches, and lunch you will find MetroDeliTally.com. Go on in, and on Thursdays they've got a cheeseburger wrap that I think really will knock your socks off. So I was impressed with that. And those two have really helped us get to some away games already this year, like Arlington, and we'll continue to do so throughout the year. Those of you listening on Apple Pods, Spotify, Google Pods, everywhere else, you're watching on YouTube, we appreciate you. If you're watching on X later tonight, we are recording this, and then we will go live, so not a purely live show. Brett's got some cool video elements and things that we're trying to do this year via a way that you can watch. So more ways to access Sunday Golds. Had some fans come up to us this weekend, actually, as I was leaving the park, and let me know they listen to the podcast and that they love what we do. And so that meant a lot to us. And please share this thing with your friends. Like and subscribe on Brett Nevitt's YouTube. And if you could, please give us 5 stars, leave us a review. The more you help us push this podcast out and share it, the bigger it becomes, and the more Noles fans who love Florida State baseball on the diamond can access our stuff. We'll be here all year long. Florida State now 8-2 on the year. Brett, I know you had a weekend in which you kind of got a chance to be a normal person for a change and go out and enjoy your loved ones and be able to enjoy Jupiter and South Florida a little bit. But I know you're keeping your eye on the Noles. I was in the booth all weekend, 18 innings of them on Saturday with Chris Chavez, and then another 9 on Sunday. But a lot to get to in this one. Hope you're doing well, my friend.
Yeah, same to you. I mean, wasn't able to catch any of the 18 innings or 19 innings, I guess it was, on Saturday of the doubleheader. Was down at the Cognizant Classic for most of Saturday with a bunch of friends and had that planned for a while. So took a break from watching baseball for a little bit to watch Brooks Koepka and some other guys. But yeah, I mean, obviously, an interesting weekend. You come out of there with a sweep, but you still have some concerns over the offense, but at the same time, you feel like the pitching is trending in the right direction and getting to see the weekend rotation set as you expected. It went as you would expect, I think, against the Citadel offense and probably, a bit better. I mean, you only gave up 8 hits all weekend and I think 1 earned run. Like you can't ask for any better than that. That's as good as it's going to get. And a lot of that has to do with throwing the ball in the strike zone consistently. And I think all the starters did that and gave you length, which will be big going into this week. But obviously at this point, there's some concerning trends starting to build with the offense. And I think also with the defense a bit. So, like every weekend, there's positives and there's negatives. At the end of the day, you came out of the week with a 4-0 week. So, not too much harm, but looking forward, there's definitely some things that you're still trying to figure out, especially with the position player group.
Yeah, and I think you and I have cautioned that the first 3 weeks of non-conference play, and really probably going into ACC play the first weekend or two, Link Jarrett is going to tinker with some things, right? He's got to find the right balance between the most optimal offensive lineup and the most optimal defensive lineup. It's a blessing, right? If you can find both that match up like you had last year, where Florida State was one of the best defensive teams in the ACC, and they just all happen to also be some of the most talented offensive players in the league as well. That doesn't happen every year, right? A couple years ago with James Tibbs, Cam Smith, and that group, you did have to do some creative piecing things together, right? And I think that group decided ultimately to really understand and I think appreciate that you had to mash your ways to victory. And then that was something that offense did. Obviously, Jamie Arnold, remember, developed and evolved and emerged that season as a star on the mound. I'm not so sure that this season might not have to be similar, if that makes sense. I don't know if they'll be capable of doing that, but that might have to be the recipe for this group, in which you're going to have a couple of starting pitchers that excel on the weekends, and that's your hope at least. And then you're going to have to find what works offensively, because that might be the way that you win over 9 innings of baseball, right? It might be the recipe for winning ball games at a high level. Maybe it's not ideal. I know Link Jarrett really wants to pitch and play defense, and I was talking to him over the weekend and before one of my broadcasts. We were down there, and he's like, if you can pitch and play defense and you can prevent runs from scoring, you will be in every ball game. And he's right about that. I think he's spot on that if you play defense at an elite level and you can pitch at an elite level, you will have a chance to win a majority of your ball games. My question becomes, and there is still time for us to evaluate this, Brett, and I'm curious to hear your thought before we get into the nitty-gritty of the weekends. Can this group be elite defensively? Can this group be elite on the mound? I have yellow flags, right? Not quite red flags yet, but there are some yellow flags, in my opinion, of can that group do this? I'm curious to hear your thoughts, because I've made it known, I think, over the last couple of episodes, I think that the offense is going to have to be the way that you win ball games, right? And finding that best 9 or 10, however you want to do platoons or whatnot, to find ways to win ball games. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, after 10 games, what you think the best approach will be for Florida State in 2026 to win ball games.
Yeah, I think, as you were talking, the thought that was building up for me was, is this group capable of being an elite defensive unit, even if you put your best defensive unit out there, especially, in current form with Chase Estes being hurt, which seems like, that'll be an extended injury, and Brody DeLongmuir as well. I don't think that's an extended injury. He was in the dugout this weekend. It looked like he's doing fine after being through concussion protocol, but yeah, I don't know if you can be a completely elite defensive group at this point. But I don't know if you can be an elite offensive group at this point either, based on what you did this weekend with what you probably would think are your best offensive lineups out there, with Putnam playing second base and Paulino DHing. But, that's one weekend as well. But I think the thing for me is, like, yes, we expected them to tinker with the lineup and tinker with the position player group a lot early in the year, but I don't know if we'd expect it to be this much or want it to be this much at this point, and still be at this point and not really feel like you have answers. Like, how many answers do you really have at this point? Like, you just moved Cal back to third and Frazier to short. Did you like that? Or did, Frazier's now played all 3 spots. Like, he played throughout the fall and the preseason. Now, most of the fall, I think he was at short, but there's just a lot of movement still going on. In 10 games, you've had eight unique lineups. You've had multiple guys play every single position but first base. You've had multiple guys hit in every single spot of the lineup. That wouldn't be the case probably if Dowd didn't miss Sunday. And a lot of this mixing and matching is somewhat to do with injuries like Dowd on Sunday. But, it just feels like you're at this point and you haven't found any sort of consistency with the offense or the defense, and you haven't really found consistent answers for what you're going to do moving forward. And at this point, we're only 6 days, or not 6 days, but you're 6 games away from ACC play. So, you still got some time, but you're not that far away to being at that point where you really need to have some answers once that time of the season starts.
I was getting some questions from people about, when do you think you'll have a good feel for this group? And, I tell people you got to give it at least a month and probably about 2 ACC series. Now, when they play Wake Forest, I think here in a couple of weeks up there in Winston-Salem, we'll find out a lot about the competitive level of this group at this stage in the season, right? And Wake's really good. They're pitching at a really high level. They had a little bit of a dip under Coach Walter there on the mound last year. And really each of the last 2 years, they haven't been as strong. I think they've figured some stuff out. And there's some real high octane arms, especially on the weekend right now up there. And it's a small ballpark, and it'll be an interesting weekend. They still hit the baseball. They had coined themselves Rake Forest for a reason, and they still find ways, especially at home in that ballpark with the way the wind blows out. They'll be in a very offensive group as well. So that'll be a really good, I think, top 20 series by that point in the year. They're, I think, hovering in the 15 to 20 range themselves. And I think that for me will be the weekend. So up until that point, I'm curious to see how Florida State continues to try and piece things together. They gave Putnam his first extended action of the weekend and of the season, really, against the Citadel. I actually thought he looked pretty good overall, and I'd like to see him get more looks in the lineup. At second base, he didn't look overwhelmed. I know that's where he played most of the time at Davidson prior to making his way. Had a diving catch that looked good, turned a double play that looked good. I know the athleticism and the range may not quite be there, and he's going to get tested with some plays if they stick with him at second base as the season goes on. But I liked what I saw. Hauser this weekend was playing bigger than normal. I heard there was high atmospheric pressure and the wind was blowing in. So that created some loud outs. Hunter Carnes and Putnam and Stutzer, on top of a few others, hit the ball pretty hard a couple times. It should probably have left the ballpark, if it's another month from now or 2 months from now. So I'm curious to see how that continues to evolve. The power numbers right now, is it 7 home runs in 10 games? Do I have that right? And I think 4 from Miles Bailey. Did I get a home run call this weekend? I'm not sure that I did.
No. And
I called all 3 games. I don't remember it.
The lineup out there on Sunday, without doubt in it, with the shoulder banged up, Miles is the only person in that lineup that has a home run so far this year, because Brody is also out right now.
Yeah, so Brody out with concussion protocol, and Jace out with the leg, and Dowd being out. That was tough. And I told Link, I said, I know it's probably got to be very disappointing that Estes has the best game of his career, and the next day he hurts his leg, right? And that's just the kind of tough luck that it seems like Florida State athletics has had and Florida State baseball has had with injury luck over the last 3 years. But man, you talk about a guy with a high floor defensively and could have found something for you offensively. And certainly the game against Michigan for Jace was a step in the right direction of him potentially being an everyday guy for you. And one of those guys we always talk about has to emerge maybe unexpectedly for you to have a good ball club. And that hurts. Brody, obviously, you mentioned being out. He has 2 home runs on the year. And, they missed him this weekend in right field. There were some issues defensively in the outfield because Brody wasn't there. Chase hasn't hit the baseball the way that you want. It was good to see him get a couple of bunt singles, though, and start to look like himself again, swiping a bag at second and being that Chase Williams that, right now it's got to be so frustrating for him coming back from injury and feeling like the whole world's against him. And he's a very high emotion player. And when it's really good, he can really help your ball club. And I know when it's really not going your way, it can really hurt him and really maybe be overwhelming for him. So that was unique. I thought Fisher at third base made a major difference at the bag at third. And you saw that when they went to it. I'm not so sure what Frazier's capabilities are at shortstop. We'll see what Florida State decides to do there. I thought it was unique that Kelvin Paulino got the start twice, but then didn't get a start in game 3. They gave Shmela a couple of DH opportunities on the weekend, and he actually looked pretty good at the plate and had a few hits there at the DH position. And then Noah Sheffield, right, got to lead off. Was that just game 3, I think? Sheff got the opportunity to lead off. And I don't hate him at leadoff. I think, he's aggressive and wants to barrel the ball, and he did again a few times this weekend. But they've got to continue to find ways, I think, to try and chop wood at this thing, because if Miles is the only one right now that's going to be consistent in that lineup, people are going to avoid Miles Bailey at all costs. And you saw this weekend, Brett, Miles got hit by a pitch, I think 3 different times, and 2 of them were up and in towards the head area. And that's just the way people are going to deal with a guy that can change the game with one swing. So those were my offensive takeaways. Lack of power. They did barrel some balls though this weekend that I hope will in turn a few weeks from now be rewarded. So I'm not completely down on this offense. I thought Carnes had some good at bats as well, but then again, he didn't play all 3 games. And to me, like, you got to figure out how to get Carnes in there every day because he has to be when he's a middle of the order at bat for you and a potential, what's the right word? Potential protection for Miles Bailey. You can't really afford to sit him. And I understand the catching, but we've got to get to a point, I think, in a couple of weeks, in a month or 2 months, where Carnes is playing every single day. If you're going to give him a rest, it's a DH, right? And that's hopefully you figured out some things that allow that scenario to play out. But, Sunday's lineup was not great. It was not the best lineup you went with. And, I think those are my thoughts overall. I think Sunday, again, with the injuries and you took Carnes out of the lineup, you were going to be challenged offensively to find some runs there. But overall on the weekend, I wanted to get this part out of the way, the offense, right? Scoring only 10 runs in 3 games, because I really do want to get to what really stood out to me. And that was the pitching, because it was fantastic. I mean, it was as good as it gets from both the bullpen and the starting rotation. But Brett, I want to hear your thoughts on offense and some of the different personnel, and then we'll get into some of the pitching.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue with the offense right now is it's just an ability to break open a big inning and put crooked numbers on the board. And part of that is just the lack of slug right now. Like we mentioned with the home runs, like it's hard to put up big numbers without hitting a 3-run homer, without one swing changing inning. And when you're not doing that, and on top of that, you're not doing little things to help yourself score runs on the base path and with stuff like small ball, like not being able to get bunts down. And then, I think Chef cost you 2 runs on Sunday with base running errors. And Link talked about that after the game. Like, I think it's just a lot of things compounding on top of each other. It's a little bit of the approach and a lot of the swing decisions, and like a lot of those swing decisions are leading to multiple outs. Like I think there was one moment on Sunday when I was watching that, they get the leadoff runner on base, and then Cal swings at a first pitch slider low and away outside of the zone and grounds into a double play. And it's just like, it just kills an inning so quick on a pitch that you really shouldn't even have swung at. I know it's not easy to lay off those pitches, but at some point you have to know what people are coming at you with over and over again. And you just need some of the guys that you expected coming into this year to give you what you expected. Cal is one of those guys. He's hitting 250 right now with 0 home runs. Chase Williams, obviously, you just have to have Chase. You just have to have that impact, in my opinion. And I didn't love taking him out of the lineup. I think that probably was kind of a wake-up call to him. But he wouldn't have played all weekend as a starter if Dowd hadn't gotten scratched on Sunday. But you just, this defense needs Chase. They need Chase in center, and you have to have the ability to manufacture runs if you're not going to hit the ball into the yard. And Chase, more than anyone, can manufacture runs on his own. Now, for him to do that, he's got to be able to put the ball in play, which he has not been doing. But I'd been texting you for days, they just need to tell Chase to bunt. He's got to bunt. And finally he bunted 2 times in a row on Sunday, and they both turned into hits. You just need some of that stuff. You need some of that stuff that you expected to be there this year to start being there for you. And you need some guys to get healthy, and you need a lot of guys to have a better approach. You need to have better base running. There's a lot of things that Link's probably not very happy about right now. It's just, there's a lot of stuff compounding on top of each other. And that's part of having a lot of new faces like you've had every year. But, at some point that's going to catch up. And Link's talked about some of these guys aren't comfortable doing the things. They don't understand kind of exactly what they want them to do when it comes to the little things. And, when you're 10 games into this, that is a little concerning. But like I said, there's still a lot of time. There's a lot of season left, and you just need guys that have done it before, like Cal and Chase and some other guys to do it. And you need Dowd. You need some of the barrels for Dowds to start turning into hits. You need the barrels from Carnes to start turning into home runs. You You need Putnam to give you some of what he did production-wise at Davidson. Like, there's just a lot of guys that just have to play better and approach, every at-bat better, because there's not enough quality at-bats stacked upon each other right now.
Yeah, I think some important notes there. I'd like to see what it looks like completely, the full, best offensive lineup when everyone's healthy. Let's see what that looks like. I think that's one more tinker that we need to see, whether that's, I don't know, this week against either JU or Mercer, or this weekend against Northern Kentucky, the Norse, who, by the way, beat South Carolina in a game earlier this season. Not that South Carolina is very good, but something to keep an eye on, right? It's a team capable of pulling off an upset like that. I do also want to mention they only struck out 18 times in 3 games. So it wasn't like there was a ton of swing and miss this weekend against, I think, a pretty good rotation that the Citadel will provide. That's a really good mid-major pitching staff. And talking to Russell Triplett, Russell Triplett's actually a former Clemson Tiger who played in Omaha. So good coach. They jumped to 31 wins last year in the SoCon in his first year. He knows what he's doing. It's a military academy with a lot of guys that are in shape and play hard and are tough-nosed and are older kids, right? And they had 3 pitchers to me. They're 2 starters in game 1 and 2 and 1 bullpen arm that I was like, that's for a mid-major. They're going to overwhelm some of those teams they play in that conference. And they didn't even have one of their best pitchers available all weekend in Michael Gibson, who was dealing with a personal family emergency. And he didn't even make his start in game 3. And they had told me he was 92 to 95 with the fastball and a wipeout slider. So that to me was a, context. It always matters, right? You're playing a team that can pitch it, that didn't play great defense on the weekend. They were a mixed bag. It was like highlight reel play or completely dropping something in the outfield or on a pop-up. John Stutzer went 3 for 4 in one of the games, and 2 of his hits were just dropped pop-ups that they gave him base hits because the ball was lost in the sky, right? And it was 5 feet out of the infield. You won a game on game 2 because of an error by the defense after Patel makes a diving stop and throws the ball home and the catcher doesn't hold on. So that's how that game ended. But it wasn't an awful opponent. This wasn't, this was a team that, in my opinion, was better than JMU. Obviously not quite the level of teams you played in 3 games out in Arlington, but context matters. So I want to see this group fully healthy. I would like to see what that best offense looks like. They didn't strike out a ton. You've been keeping track of the number of barrels that they've had that have gone unrewarded. Let's see how that goes as the season continues to go forward. But then I also just am curious on what ends up being the way Florida State wants to win ball games, and is that going to be this offense in the month of April that finally figures itself out? Link Jarrett has coached good offense pretty much everywhere that he's been. It's not always going to be the home run hitting offense, but if you look at his career, pretty much everywhere, they're good offensive ball clubs. And I do trust that he'll figure out a way to score runs again with this group. But they do have to figure some stuff out, right? And they've got to find out how to protect Bailey. And to me, another key on the season will be, can they put pressure on defenses on the base paths? Can you unlock Chase or Stutzer or Frazier on the base paths to be able to find different ways to manufacture runs? Because if they're not going to hit home runs, which, again, I'm going to have to keep an eye on as the season goes on, you got to find ways to be able to get the ball, to the outfield or get guys on base, get them over, get them in. So those are my thoughts. I'm curious as to your philosophy on how they can be effective.
Yeah, I mean, I do think you got to try to get all your bats in there. And right now, I think that's Putnam at second. And I think that's Paulino probably DHing for you. With Carnes behind the plate every day, like you mentioned. I think once you get Brody back, probably plug him back into right field. Like I mentioned with Chase, I just believe that if this lineup is ever going to reach its ceiling, it's with him being in there. And I think, hopefully that would be 9 as a double leadoff guy and trying to spark some stuff for you there. But really interested to see what they do with Cal and Frazier moving forward defensively. I also wonder, maybe do they find that Putnam fits more athletically at third, and then, maybe you move Cal to second and you like Cal. I've mentioned before, I think Cal might be their best second baseman and their best third baseman defensively, especially with Jace not healthy right now. So do they continue to tinker with the infield, or now do you ride with this for a week or two and kind of see what happens? Because I think as much as the offense is concerned, the defense has to be a concern too. And if you're going to go with the offensive lineup, then the defense is going to continue to be a concern probably. So can you strike out enough guys on the mound then to not make it be a concern, I guess? But yeah, there's still a lot to figure out right now. It's interesting to look at. It's hard to put together. It's like you mentioned, they did not strike out much this weekend, which was a change from the past weekend, but they also didn't walk much. I think they walked 4 times in the last 2 games and were only able to produce 4 runs in those 2 games. And, I think a lot of the time your runs match up to how many walks you have in a game, and that they walked 6 times in game 1, they scored 6 runs. So like it usually ends up matching up pretty closely. So I would like to see them work some better at bats. I don't know how you approach that as a coach. Do you put the reins on guys more on first pitches? But then do you feel like you're taking away, the batter's just control of the at bat? And before this coaching staff came in, we've always felt like they were too patient, and now it feels like they're a little too aggressive. So it's just kind of trying to find the fine balance of being selectively aggressive, I think, and being aggressive at the right pitches early in counts rather than just simply being aggressive and just swinging all the time.
Yeah, I mean, and 2 more thoughts from me, and we'll switch to the pitching staff. Again, offense in college baseball comes and goes. That's for everyone, with lineups that are gorilla ball and they mash, and lineups that, like a few years ago, 11's final team, not a great offense. And then all of a sudden could not get out at Georgia or at LSU. And you remember that, Brett? That was insane. From the ACC tournament on, it just clicked. That can happen with any offense. Look at any run. That's why I don't end up getting too concerned about offense unless there are major injuries, which right now you're dealing with a couple, but hopefully those guys get back sooner rather than later. But I think that's also why Link Jarrett wants to focus on pitching and defense. When we were having that conversation, he knows that offense comes and goes, pitching and defense is important. But he also made a comment to me and said, you got to score runs. You can't not score runs, right? And so that's something they're trying to figure out right now as well. But yeah, man, that's going to be something for us to monitor this season. I do think, if you had told me coming into this year, who are the people that need to step up and give you kind of a high floor, right? Guys that you had to count on coming into the year. I would have told you Miles Bailey, Hunter Carnes, Cal Fisher, Chase Williams. Those are the 4 to me. They've been here.
I would add Dowd. I was going to say.
But the problem with that is I didn't know what Dowd 100% would do. So you've seen what Dowd can do now. But I'm saying coming into the year, and there's a larger point. Of those 4 names that I gave you, 2 of them right now aren't giving you much of anything at the plate. I trust Fish to figure it out. Cal has been a 300 hitter for the first 2 years of his career, around that. And I do think track record matters. I trust him. He's in such good spirits too right now that you see him down there and he's smiling and having a good time. There is no pressure on him at the moment. He'll figure it out. Chase, they got to find a way to get back to playing like Chase Williams. You can't afford Chase to hit anything lower than 275 to 290 on the year. I just don't think he can. Is he going to hit 342 again like he did last year? Maybe not. Miles has been giving you what Miles is going to give you. And Carnes looks like the at-bats look right. They're not awful ABs. He's got quality plate appearances, not always getting rewarded. He should have had a baseball that was 3/4 the way up the scoreboard this weekend that somehow hit the top of the wall. But then you have Dowd, right, who comes in, Putnam, who comes in, Paulino, who comes in. Sheffield's been a surprise. Can he continue to hit at that level? I also think he's kind of a dilemma for Link Jarrett, if you want me to be completely honest. I love Noah Sheffield. I think it's been cool to see him hit. But one, he's not really lifting the baseball, so he's not really a home run threat at the moment. And two, him being a DH and being in the outfield, he's cost you games. Well, he's cost you runs in the outfield. So he really has proven that he can only DH at this point. If he doesn't continue to hit 300 something, he's not going to be in the lineup. I can guarantee you, as soon as Noah goes cold, and that can be in the next 2 or 3 weeks or a month, they're going to find other options at DH because they have better options in the outfield. I would argue that him hitting 300 right now has thrown a wrench into, I think, Link Jarrett's plans on trying to figure out, because you can't take Noah out of the lineup. He's barreling baseballs, right? I mean, there are a lot of hard exit velocities, and I'm not rooting for him to not hit well. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. I do think, though, that it's causing this wheel to be spun right now on, well, where do we put everyone else since Noah's locked up a spot in the lineup every day? That equation will be interesting for them because, Paulino's waiting to DH and Putnam's waiting to DH potentially. And I talk about Carnes on the days off. He needs to DH. These are some of the issues that I think the coaching staff is trying to figure out in terms of getting the guys you expect to hit on a daily basis and give you, quality plate appearances on the regular versus guys who have emerged and where those guys fit. I am genuinely very curious just to see how this plays out in the next month or so. I would love for Noah Sheffield to hit 350 all year and be an all ACC caliber bat. That would alleviate some problems for you in the lineup. But we'll have to see what they do with Paulino and Stutzer and Brody when he comes back, and Dowd, and where they want to fit some of these pieces as they continue. So I think offensively, that's probably a pretty good conversation for this episode. Brett, is there anything else that you want to touch on offensively that maybe what I just said triggered a thought?
Yeah, I was just going to add from that, just with the DH position right now, it just feels like they're kind of using that to give guys who earn it opportunities. Like you said, Chef for a really long period of time there was just kind of had those DH at bats and wasn't relinquishing them because of the consistent at bats that he was putting together. And then obviously at a certain point, with the way the outfield was going health wise, you needed to move him out there. And then, you get Paulino in there because of what he had been doing in his pinch hit opportunities, but then he doesn't deliver for you. While Nate had 3 hits, so then Nate gets the opportunity at DH. So it just feels like, will we see Nate DH again on Tuesday because he had more good at-bats on Sunday? That might be the case. But I think at some point you hope to find a DH that can just go out there every day and bang for you. Like, that's the point of the position. It's to have a guy that produces runs for you and hits for power and goes out there every day and what they're going to give you offensively. Like, that is the point of the position. And I think at some point, hopefully by the time you get to ACC play, you have someone that just goes and fully grasp it. And maybe that is Noah. Maybe Noah just continues to do that. I mean, he does lead the team right now with 4 doubles, tied with, I think, with Dowd as well. But so, I mean, like you said, he hasn't really given up that opportunity yet, but there are guys knocking at the door. And at some point, I don't think you can just do that for the entirety of the season with the DH spot. I think at some point you hope to lock someone down there that you feel like is an everyday contributor and producer for you.
Yeah, it's a lot of pieces that we talked about at the beginning of the year, man. They feel better at the plate with a lot of these guys than they do in the field. And that's causing the puzzle pieces, right? And the jigsaw puzzle of trying to figure out how that best meshes, and it's creating some issues, through 10 games that we're all seeing. And you saw it defensively. I think you saw they tried to get their best offensive lineup, and it created serious issues defensively. And, some of those questions, people are like, hey, well, why don't you put X, Y, and Z in the lineup? Well, those same people texted me, Brett, as soon as somebody made an error in the outfield or dropped a ball or couldn't handle a chopper or et cetera, and they were like, oh, okay. Understood. Yeah, that's kind of the imperfection of the roster that they have currently, and they're trying their best to figure out how to win ball games in 2026. And I think there's a path there, but we're going to have to see that thing evolve over the next couple of weeks. I think one area that this group and this coaching staff should feel really proud of and go to bed sleeping well at night is the way their rotation pitched on the weekend. The bullpen was really good too. We'll get into that, but the rotation on the weekend was outstanding. The three guys that they thought, Brett, that would come into the year, Mendez, Beard, and Moore, all delivered outstanding performances. And I think there's some storylines with all three guys, but Mendez comes in, does his job, has to pitch with, without the lead, right? And he's in a deficit and he's got to keep his team in the ball game. And I checked off a green box there on my notes in the fact that Mendez mentally was able to handle that situation. It didn't go off the rails for him when his defense wasn't playing at its best behind him, and he looked more mature and he handled it, I thought, with grace and, as Link Jarrett coins, right, self-contained relief at times. And he found a way to get through that traffic, and I think he gave up one earned run, which ended up being the first earned run he's allowed on the year. So Mendez gets a check. Beard was the high anticipatory weekend rotation arm that everyone was waiting for a couple of weeks to see in the rotation. I feel bad because the broadcast didn't come on until like the 9th inning in that game, so most people missed it live. There was some kind of routing issue, man, that for whatever reason ESPN couldn't get the route from Florida State in Bristol. And it was a couple of ACC schools were having that issue. It wasn't just Florida State. I know we got a lot of blowback for that and people were upset, and I'd be upset too. So I apologize on behalf of everyone for that. And, it got remedied in time by the 9th inning, and they were able to put the game on demand back on for replay. So people who missed it can go and watch it again now. But Beard was fantastic. He looked comfortable, poised. Fastball was back up to 92 miles an hour on the afternoon, and there's still room to grow there and for that fastball to get a little hotter. But the changeup looked good. He showed a breaking ball for strikes, and he showed you the poise of a guy who's been pitching as an ace, right, for a previous school. And that's the number one transfer prospects that many people were saying on the mound in the portal, and Florida State's thankful they got him. And then Bryson Moore, we needed to see that, right? Was it a outstanding Citadel offense? No. Will he face better lineups throughout the year? Yes. But he attacked with the fastball and he landed it for strikes, and he was 92 to 94. He had a cutter that he looked like he was ripping off pretty confidently, and the breaking stuff has been pretty good for him since day one on campus. It was cool to see for him that he hadn't made it past the third weekend in any season in his college career due to arm injuries at Virginia. And to see him have a career high in innings pitched was really cool, and was really happy for him. He was all smiles, and, the stuff really plays, man. And Brett, his fastball actually had more life on the metrics to it than we had seen in the first couple of weeks. Like, there was some serious IVB, and maybe that's just a kid that when you haven't pitched that much, sometimes when you're able to pitch more, right, the stuff ticks up a little bit and you're able to start to find it as you get in rhythm and get in form. But that was awesome to see. And if that's what you get in game threes, I do think Florida State, again, this is a bold statement because there's a lot of really good teams in the ACC and there's still more to prove. But if that's what you get from Moore, I don't think you'll find a better three in the ACC this season. Like, you have the potential to have the best combo of three guys on a weekend rotation in the league. And why is that important, man? Because if you are going to struggle a little bit offensively and defensively, and if that becomes a theme on the season on trying to find some balance offensively and in the field, knowing that you have a pitching staff that can carry you for weekends could end up being a pretty big deal for this group in 2026.
Yeah, I'll kind of work backwards and pick up from where you left off on Moore. And I think one thing on Moore just that was really impressive to me was the efficiency. And a lot of that has to do with the fastball command and just getting ahead with the fastball, which you want to see him go and do against the Citadel lineup because he has the stuff to go and produce pretty consistent weak contact against a lineup like that. You mentioned the cutter as well. I think he was getting under it a little bit early on or to the side of it. And but in the second or third inning, he started ripping off some really good ones. And, there was one in there that was 90 miles per hour. That was for one of his strike counts, which I thought was probably the best one he had thrown so far this year and what it's supposed to look like when you throw a cutter the right way. With Beard, just good to see him get out there for 5 innings and throw 66 pitches or so and get the pitch count working back in a positive direction. You mentioned it to me after watching him, and I mentioned it, I think, last weekend, but the curveball I feel like is way improved from the fall. It just feels a lot tighter. I think he's throwing a knuckle curve now based on some pictures that I saw. We know what he's going to be with the fastball and changeup. That's what he's known for. Both of those are really good pitches. But if he can use the curveball and land it for strikes consistently, that's going to be a big plus for him. With Wes, you mentioned it as well, adversity. I think that's the second time this year we've seen him deal with adversity well. That's good coming off of last year. That's what you want to see from Wes. Some of the stuff that he talked about coming into this year, and he's been able to execute on that so far. And you could argue he wouldn't have given up any earned runs if they hadn't made any errors in that inning where they scored a couple of runs off him. And in that case, he would have given up 0 earned runs. So to this point this year, which he actually did last year as well. But yeah, Wes has been off to a good start. 3 starts for him and 3 wins. That's what you want to see from your Friday night starter this early in the year.
Yeah, the composure, right? We always knew the stuff was there, and he was able to kind of hide behind that on his own progression behind Jamie Arnold and Joey Vellini. But to be able to handle the moment, and again, it was at home against the Citadel. We're going to learn a lot more about Wes and his ability to pitch on Friday nights in the ACC. But he was down 2-0 in this ball game, and he had to keep his team in it and allow an offense that was struggling some opportunities, and he did that, right? And the defense behind him wasn't terrific, and that didn't seem to phase him. He got better as the ball game went on, and that's a step in the right direction for Wes. Trey Beard, that might be the key to your season. If I'm being candid, Brett, is how Beard adjusts to the ACC and to Florida State altogether in the weekend rotation. He does have some serious stuff and is a top 3 round guy if he can pitch to the level that we think he's capable. We didn't see the slider, and I know he has that. It's like a gyro slider that he's shown some really good ability to rip off when he was at FAU. And I'm curious to see, when he's fully ramped up and going and at 100 pitches, if he can find a way to add that pitch in, the slider, a cutter that they said they worked on, and they threw that a couple of times on Saturday in game 2. And then that curveball that, Brett, it was a little harder than we had seen it in the preseason. It wasn't 71, 72. He was getting it at 75 a couple of times, which I know was a comment that you and I had talked about in preseason before the year started. One comment that you made, and I forgot to text you this when it happened, but you had made this comment to me on the final preseason inter-squad scrimmage that they had. And you said Beard got better as his outing went on. And it happened again against the Citadel. I made a comment to Chavez, and I said, would you let him go one more inning? Because he's starting to look the best that he has all game in terms of sharpness, right, and command of the fastball and all of his secondary offerings. And Chavez said no, because you're ramping him up, and 67 pitches is a perfect first start as you're trying to do that. But Brett, man, did he go 6 full innings? Let me see the box score that I have to pull off. Did he go 5 or 6?
5.
He went 5, and he was at 67 pitches and starting to really dial it in. And I think he struck out something like 3 or 4 in a row late in his outing. And I went, man, this guy could have gone 7 tonight. And that's something that he was known for at FAU, was being able to go deep into ball games and really give you a shot. And he's like Joey Vellini in that way, in that as the game goes along, he gets better. He starts to get a feel for his stuff. He made a comment, I think, to Chavez over the weekend that my fastball gets better as I get to like pitch 50. And that's a good sign, and that was our first full body of work that we got to see from Trey Beard as a starter at Florida State. And then Bryson Moore, yeah, man, I'm really just happy for that kid personally, and you see why the staff likes him so much. It's a fastball that has some life to it and really good breaking stuff as well. So this rotation has a chance, I think, for Florida State to be able to lean on as the season continues.
Yeah, something you mentioned with Beard specifically, that was kind of my takeaway when I saw him, was the fastball gets a lot better the deeper he gets into the outing. He kind of just started dominating with it after, from the 4th and 5th inning and the preseason scrimmage that I saw when he went 75 pitches or so. That checks out here and that. That's kind of what you expect from a guy that's as experienced as a starter as he is. And that's part of the reason that he's been able to start for 2 full collegiate seasons and now, entering a 3rd. This is a guy that's never stopped starting since he was in high school, never really been a reliever at all, just always been a starter and a guy that works pretty deep into games. And that just comes with the endurance of doing that over and over again and knowing what to expect as you get deeper into a start. And he's kind of just used to the fatigue of going deep into a games, but pitching through that and getting better through that. And that's why I think he has a really, really high ceiling for you. And a guy that, like you said, could be the X factor, really the determining factor of how far you go this year. Because if West can continue to throw the way he has, and you have Beard on Saturday, you feel like that can be a pretty lethal 1-2 punch of left-handers.
I agree. And I think in that fifth inning, Brett, he struck out the side and he allowed one runner to reach base on a drop third strike that they ended up having Patel, I think, got to first base. And then he picks off Patel with a pretty nasty move, and then he strikes out the guy anyway. And that's what I mean. When he left the game in the fifth for his outing, I was thinking, oh, man, he's just starting to figure it out right now. Like he right now is feeling it. And when we get into ACC play, I think that's going to be so important. So, yeah, man, between Mendez and Beard, I loved what I saw. I know the context of the Citadel's offense is not their hallmark, and they're not going to be a great offensive team this year, but you got to see it, right? You've got to see it against a different uniform to have some confidence as you go forward in the season. It would have been really nice for Trey Beard to be fully available against Auburn on that Saturday in Arlington. I would have loved to see that, because that changes. If you find a way to win that ball game, doesn't that change the entire perception of that weekend overall? Even with Nebraska happening in Game 3, you would have felt overly optimistic about coming out of Arlington. So we take pride on this pod in context, right? And telling you straight up reasons for concern and why sometimes you shouldn't be completely waving the red flag and being panicked. So good stuff there from the rotation, man. Another opportunity this weekend against Northern Kentucky. The Noles didn't use a ton of guys on the weekend on the mound, which was good to see after they used pretty much everyone on Wednesday against UNF. I think also having Friday off kind of helped this group and have that extra day to have one more opportunity for a day of rest. But the bullpen came in too and was outstanding. Like I have to give a major hat tip to John Abraham, who continues to show you that maybe he has taken the step forward. Cade O'Leary and Kevin Meeble pitched pretty well out of the pen in Game 2. And then did they go to just Kinnear in Game 3, and he did a nice job too. So did they give up any runs overall? The bullpen didn't, right? And so that, to me, I think is a good talking point for us here. We're approaching minute number 50 of the pod. So I'm curious to your thoughts. What does this bullpen look like? Who's earned more trust in your opinion? Is it time to buy stock on John Abraham out of the bullpen?
Yeah, 11 innings from the pen, only allowed 4 base runners, and like you said, no runs. John at this point has, he retired all 9 batters he faced in this outing, 3 scoreless innings, 3 perfect innings. He's now retired 28 of the last, I think, 32 hitters he's faced. In that time, 9 1/3, 3 hits allowed, 0 walks allowed in that 9 1/3, and that's the key right there for John. As long as he's filling up the zone with his stuff and getting ahead, he's going to give hitters like the Citadel hitters a lot of trouble. With some of the other guys from this weekend, also on John, once again piggybacking off of West. That's the 3rd straight weekend that he has piggybacked off of West. And kind of gone extended after him and kind of shut the game down right after him. And it seems like they're going to continue to do that and ride that plan throughout until it stops working, at least. Good to see Cade O'Leary have a successful outing. I have a lot of belief in O'Leary. I think he just needs to get settled into the college game. Obviously, I think he only threw 2 innings last year at Mississippi State, so still a young arm, but an arm I have a lot of belief in the stuff. Kevin Meeble, really good to see, 3 innings, 0 hits, 0 walks. He hasn't walked anybody yet this year, which is big for him. I think Scout told me he was 90-93, which is good to hear that he's grabbing some 93s now. And I think the slider is also sharpening up as well. So that's big to hear from the left-handed side of things. And then Kinnear, I think the thing with Kinnear this year is just he's executing his slider a lot better. There was a lot of times last year where he left the slider up, whether that was just in the zone or above the zone. And that was, a lot of the reason he didn't have as much success as he wanted to. I think when he's executing the slider down and away from right-handed hitters, he's going to have a lot more success. And that was part of the reason he had success in this outing. 3-inning save. I think that was the first of this year for him, and I think the third of his career. And we've seen Chris, I think the best we've seen of Chris has been in really high leverage moments. Like we've seen him kind of shut games down with the bases loaded a couple times last year. And then obviously this outing, he only had a 2-run lead. So, good to see that he can handle the big moments when he comes into high leverage spots. But I think the biggest thing for him this year is just executing his off-speed stuff better and getting it down more consistently.
Yeah, and it's a guy who's pitched in big moments, and I think you have to rely on that experience. Meeble was the standout for me. I think, he looked vastly more improved in this outing than he has at any other point. And they extended him for the first time this season, really. And you're right. He grabbed a couple of 93s, struck out a kid looking on 93 on the inside corner on a fastball that he spotted perfectly. The breaking ball had some serious depth to it. And it was the first time this season that I fully think I trusted that Kevin Meeble could come in and get outs. And it had nothing to do with the opponent that he was facing and everything to do with the execution of the pitches that were called. And it was glorious, man. It was awesome to see. And I'm happy for him. They took a chance on him, right, from D2 Barry, and they saw something they liked and felt like something would project as he got into the program under Micah Posey. And turns out that they might be right. Now, obviously, he's going to go up against some much, much better hitters coming up here in a couple of weeks, but you got to see him do it against somebody before you can really give him another opportunity and feel good about it. And so hat tip to him, Kevin Meeble, gold star for you. John Abraham, you need somebody to come in out of the pen and just lock it down. You have to know when he gets the ball, it's closing time. And you haven't seen that from a ton of arms, other than Purcell, who only got that one opportunity, and they're hoping to get him back here in the next week or two. But you need somebody to do it. And there's guys with a lot of stuff, and there's guys that I think people pencil in as, all right, this has to be the person who comes in and closes games out or shuts it down. But you haven't seen that consistently. And Abraham's been the one consistent all year out of the pen. And people are a little gun shy, man, and I don't blame them because they have felt optimistic about John Abraham, before, right? And he's had this Jekyll and Hyde performance in his first 2 years, but this year he has been Mr. Consistent. And I know John really cares. I've talked to John a few times. He cares, and he's high energy and loves his team and loves being out there and wants the ball. And it's go time, man. It's his junior year. This is it is a draft year for him. And this has been good to see, man. The fastball has life, and the breaking ball, he has shown the ability to land for a strike whenever he wants and manipulate it to get swing and miss. The changeup's excellent, and the cutter seems to be working for him. And this weekend, Brett, you tell me if you've noticed it, but he had gone to that 2-seam a little bit in the sinker ball, but he started using the 4-seam again to elevate and to just kind of mix it back in to change eye levels. And I thought that was interesting because now he's become really a 5-pitch guy. If you think about it, when he goes with he has 3 different fastballs, really a 6-pitch guy, and the 2 different breaking balls and a changeup. It was the first time that I had seen him kind of use all of it at once this year.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think he's 6 pitches now in total, actually. And that the 3 different types of fastballs is kind of became big in the big leagues last year with the fastball, cutter, and sinker, or 2-seamer, obviously. But they're calling it a sinker for John, and it seems like they really like the way that it's playing, and it seems like it's helping him keep the ball on the ground more and having less hard contact in the air. I think he's only given up 5 hits so far this year in like 11 innings, and batters hitting below 150 against him. So just a really, really strong start to this year. Everything outside of that first outing has been absolutely shut down, locked down, and basically almost perfect. I mean, he almost threw a perfect game over his last 4 or 5 outings, except for allowing a couple of base runners. So, but just for a little bit of context on the Citadel, through 9 games this year, and I mean 3 of those games were against FSU, so that's part of it. They're hitting 200 with the 601 OPS. from the one game I watched, just kind of seemed like a slap and run or bunt and run offense. Just try to scrap some runs together that way. But, against any offense, it's your job to put the ball in the strike zone and get swings and misses. And it seems like they did that at a pretty high level this weekend. So you have to be pretty thrilled with the way they threw the ball this weekend and hope it continues to trend in a similar direction, at least with the command and filling up the strike zone, because as long as you do that, you should have success. Now, to what degree of success, we'll find out, but it helps when you're not allowing free base runners.
Yeah, and lastly on just Abraham, as well as O'Leary, I want to touch on O'Leary too. I was talking to Micah Posey earlier this week just about the progressions of some of his guys, and with Abraham, he was just praising the way he changes shapes, and his ability to be able to navigate hitters with a bunch of different stuff, like you mentioned, Brett. But they're also trying to extend him, right, and continue to give him more pitches so that he's built up, because they do want to piggyback him, I think, off of either Wes, or if they need him to start a game, he can do it. I'm curious to see if they use John twice in a weekend, because that very well might be what you have to do at certain points in the year in ACC play, is use Abraham twice. And then with O'Leary, they're just trying to teach him not that he doesn't need haymakers every single time he's out there. Sometimes you just got to pitch and pitch to contact and attack the zone. And you can't strike somebody out on the first pitch of the AB or the second pitch of the AB. You got to land your pitches for strikes. And, I thought it was a mixed bag from him this weekend. It was overall pretty good, but he had a hit by pitch and a walk, and it was because he was, yanking some of the pitches again. And I think, for him, like you mentioned, he's young and still trying to learn and get innings under his belt. But like you said, they have so much optimism that O'Leary is going to be a dude for them, and they're going to keep giving him the ball, because quite frankly, they need him to have the ball and be good for them this year. So I thought that was interesting from Posey on those two guys.
Yeah, and I mean, they have a lot of guys at this point that you still feel like you could add to the mix, and you hope to add to the mix, and that we probably thought were going to be a large part of the staff coming into the year. Probably Cole Stokes, number one of those guys, and he wasn't even on the mound this weekend. And the one time he got on the mound on Wednesday, it didn't go very well again with the command, and kind of just spraying the ball all over the place. And then obviously Purcell, who's been injured as well. So if you could get Purcell back healthy, if you could get Stokes back in the zone with the power stuff, if you could get O'Leary to kind of settle into what he's doing in his role with the stuff that he has as well, you start to really kind of, elevate your ceiling as a staff of what you can be, especially now that Beard's back in the mix on Saturdays. And that's allowing you to kind of, line everything back the way you want it to. Not to mention Rhett Vaughn also being a guy for you now who you feel like can start midweek games along with Manka, which really helps in a week like this with 5 games. So, I think especially after how those last 2 games went into Arlington, and really the midweek game too, you feel a lot better coming out of this weekend. But I think this week will be a really interesting week to see how they navigate it with the Arms with the 5-game week. But I also got a little bit distracted for a second because I saw Tibbs hit a 458-foot homer today. So second homer in as many days. And thank you, Craig Breslow. Good stuff. But anyways, good for you, James. That is awesome.
You're telling me, man, I'm a Braves fan. I'm going to have to cope with the fact that James Tibbs is going to be a star for the Dodgers. I'm happy for him. Him and I are, and you and the three of us friends, and we know the family, and I love seeing his success, but it's going to come at the expense of the Atlanta Braves. And
at least you didn't trade him for like 6 starts of Dustin May.
Those watching right now are seeing the grief on my face of this dilemma I'm facing. I despise the Dodgers. I despise them. When the Braves won the World Series against the Astros, I enjoyed beating the Dodgers more in the NLCS than I did actually winning the World Series. And they have caused me so much pain. And now I have to accept. Maybe they'll trade him.
You have Alex.
I know James is probably – I do have Alex, and I will have a jersey and a uniform as soon as he gets called up. But maybe, I'm sure James is tired of being traded. I'm sure he's ready to settle in, but maybe he'll get traded to the Braves as well. I don't know. They can have Bryce Elder.
Yeah, there's just a
All
couple
yours, Dodgers.
lineup blocking him. Just a couple random guys.
Yeah, just a couple. So we could go on about this for an hour, but Brett, let's talk about the week up ahead for Florida State. They play JU on Tuesday, 6 o'clock, second game against JU on the season. A couple weeks ago, the Noles went out there and they got the run rule in 8 innings, 13-3 against the Dolphins. And then Mercer, they have been a pest in the side of Florida State for the last couple of years. I think they're actually on a 2-game win streak against FSU, both happening in midweeks. And they've won something like, I think, 4 games against Florida State in the last 10 years. There's some history there, man. Craig Gibson does a really nice job at Mercer. That's a really good mid-major program that is in the mix seemingly every single season in the SoCon. So you're going to play another SoCon team that you just played, the Citadel. So those two will be going head-to-head in their season, and Florida State's going to get to see both of them. Mercer rakes. JU really hits the baseball. It's offense over pitching for both of those teams. But midweeks, Brett, can be challenging. And we've already seen some chaos on the midweeks all around college baseball. And there was chaos for Florida State in the midweek against UNF. And so this will be a challenging week because you're playing 5 games. You're actually in a really good spot on the mound because of the fact that you didn't have to use too many arms over the weekend. And I would expect, Stokes and Manka and Vaughn and Nard and some of these guys, I'm sure Abraham will be available as well and hot and ready to go. Can Purcell come back this week and give you an inning? But that seems like the combo of guys that will be available against these 2 teams. And yeah, man, there might be some offense. You need your offense to come back to life in the midweek against JU and Mercer. Mercer's not playing another midweek game. So this is actually going to be Mercer's only midweek game, and it'll be your second midweek playing them on Wednesday. Do you have records for them? I should probably have that since I'm calling those games. I know JU's
3. I didn't see Mercer's.
11-1 for Mercer, and they've won 9 in a row. And their only loss on the year is to Troy, who is fantastic in the mid-major as well. And Mercer won that weekend series 2 out of 3 against Troy. So it looks like Mercer's one of the best mid-majors this season. They are potentially a team that could be in your regional, right? If you host a regional, and Mercer makes a lot of sense, 3.5 hours away in Macon, Georgia. We've seen the NCAA committee do it in the past. They've sent Mercer to Tallahassee before. And JU certainly, I think, is going to be a challenge in the ASUN this year. And I don't think this will be as easy as it was over there in Jacksonville a couple of weeks ago when your pitching staff shut them down for the most part. But how do you foresee this week, Brett? What are storylines and keys that you're looking for? What are you trying to learn from this Florida State team other than trying to go 2-0 against JU and Mercer on Tuesday and Wednesday?
Yeah, well, I think first off, obviously, the starting pitching. I think we expect that Rhett Vaughn and Peyton Manka will make the starts most likely. I don't know exactly what order. Obviously Vaughn threw on Wednesday last week, and Manka threw in that game as well, and that was the last time both of them threw. And Manka was the midweek starter coming into the year. But we'll see what they end up doing there with those 2 guys. But I think you feel good about those being your 2 starters on a midweek going into your first and. What is this? Is this their only 5? I think this is their only 5-game week of the season. I could be wrong about that, but they only had 1 last year, so I'm guessing they only have 1 again this year. But JU, the last time you played JU, they were coming off a 4-game weekend. This time, only coming off a 3-game weekend. They did lose the series at UAB, and I'm guessing they're just staying in Tallahassee overnight and didn't go back to JU before the game. And then, like you mentioned, Mercer doesn't have a midweek game before this, and Mercer always takes their best shot at FSU. We've seen them use some of their starters out of the bullpen or even starting the game. They use their weekend starters against FSU in the past few years sometimes. And they really try to always give you their best shot. And, they can always hit. Titan Kamaka, who was at FSU a couple years ago, got his first full season of starting at Mercer last year, is off to an incredible start this year. He's hitting 514 and 37 at bats. Has also walked 13 times. Has a 623 OBP to go along with 514 average. 19 of his hits, 6 of his 19 hits are for doubles. Also has a homer. They have 18 homers as a team this year. So yeah, I think, will be two pretty grinded out, gritty games, and at some point you are going to have to mash on the midweek to get some W's, I think, even if you feel good about the pitching going into it.
Totally agree. I'm curious to see how they navigate the midweek, and they should have a lot of arms available. So I would imagine, outside of the couple of guys that'll start, it's Johnny Holstaff to figure it out, and all hands on deck as is. And these weeks you got to get the offense going, and if you can win some games 14-9, like you did against UNF, I think you certainly will take it. So far in the midweek, Brett, the Noles have scored 13 and 14. So in those two games, the offense has found success, and they're going to need a repeat of that, I think, in this midweek. Mercer's actually pitched at a really high level this year. They've been pretty good overall. I think they had one game get away from them where they gave up 17 runs or something like that to Troy in that final game, but more times than not, they have held their opponents to under 5 runs in their other games. So it's going to be a challenge. Anything else you want to add, or are you ready to sign off?
No, I think that's all from me today.
All right, man. Well, good stuff. Again, thanks to our sponsors from Alumni Hall and Metro Deli. Do want to, again, encourage you guys to subscribe to Brett Nevitt's YouTube, to subscribe to the podcast, share this with your friends, like and review, and 5 stars if you can on Apple, on Spotify. Leave us some comments as well. And we can't wait to see you guys at the park this week. Brett, I know you're